As many of you have probably heard, there was another shooting today at a community college in rural Oregon. Part of the dysfunction of our political system today is that there is an overwhelming consensus in America on two things that are equally defensible: the Second Amendment and sane gun legislation. The Second Amendment doesn't say you can own a bazooka. It doesn't say you can own an F-15 with Hellfire missiles. There's the ability of the government to limit the type of weapon that is available. And although we don't have enough information now, we're basically the only civilized country in the world where we have these massive murders. And 87% of the American people agreed with the proposal I put together for the president on background checks and gun safety. Even over 60% of NRA families, National Rifle Association families, support it. I cite that as part of the dysfunction because we're able to have decided minorities prevent consensus from occurring. But that's for another day. You've been discussing a lot of consequential issues facing the world, from public health issues to fights against extremism. And all these things are going to take time to impact on. But I want to make the point the founders of this fora, I think, believe, and I'm confident that if we focus all the stakeholders on these problems, there's not a problem we cannot solve. That's why I admire Concordia so much. 5 years ago, you brought together the brightest minds of all sectors of society: government, policymakers, business executives, nonprofits, academics, to deal with the vexing problems the world faces. And now you're launching a Concordia campaign to focus on the scourge of human trafficking, which affects every country and every society. And defeating it is going to take a hell of a lot of coordination and work because there's so many moving parts. And it's a stain on the reputation of so many countries. Whether we're talking about poverty or human trafficking or generating an environment that can attract business to generate jobs and opportunity, all these things are impacted, in my view, if you'll forgive me, by three overriding concerns that overarchingly affect the possibility of making progress in all the things you've talked about. The first is endemic corruption. Corruption siphons away resources, it stunts economic growth, it prevents the establishment of government that people will respond to, government institutions that are required and necessary for a civilized society to function, from a court system you can trust to police agencies that you can rely on. But most importantly, it's the ultimate affront to the dignity of all people. Where corruption lives, almost everything else atrophies. Those elements in governments that are rife with corruption, even they have good people inside, but are deathly afraid to do anything about it because there are no institutional or power centers that they can rely on to support their effort to speak out and speak up. Without the support of the business community or civil society or academia, they're left powerless to do what they know has to be done. Where a judicial system is corrupt, it's not possible to grow a business. Where intellectual property is stolen, it's not possible to innovate. Where media does not function freely, it's not possible to hold the powerful accountable. Let me give you a few examples. The president has asked me to be the point person on Ukraine and Russia's, I'll use the word accurately, invasion of Ukraine, as well as the northern triangle of Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. When the Soviet Union fell, Ukraine became independent, a chance for a newfound democratic institutions to flourish, but Russia found other ways to control Ukraine. They've been working hard to reform their system. It is beginning to pay off. New laws on asset disclosure, independent National Anti-Corruption Bureau, greater government transparency, and so much more. They know their entire future lies in the EU and in the West. And the point you have to keep making to them as they approach you is we will not play if you continue to be paid. We will not engage if you do not act. I'm going to say something that will be characterized as classically Biden. I'm going to tell you the straight truth, unvarnished. Europe is not enamored with continuing to impose sanctions on Russia because it's costing them some at home. The only reason they are is the president has been emphatic that Russia must pay for this invasion or we will pay later. The president loves always quoting, he calls them Bidenisms. You know, it's either pay me now or pay me later, and reality has a way of intruding. If we do not sustain them, the price will be much larger. Watch what happens in the rest of Eastern Europe. Watch what happens in NATO. The hardest transition to make in any of these developing countries who are seeking to come out from under the control of either oligarchs, dictators, and/or without come out from under control of spheres of influence, is for civil society to begin, after all the years in opposition, to be willing to get engaged and actually run for political office, to actually dirty their hands and get into the game of trying to change the legislative process. But Kyiv needs a vocal private sector. In every developing country or country trying to emerge, you know what they ask? Can you bring Silicon Valley with you? Make it absolutely clear you're ready, but you will not engage unless officials are not engaged in taking kickbacks, unless there's transparency in their law, unless contracts are protected, unless there's a judicial system. Another example close to home is the Northern Triangle. There's no reason why Central America can't be the bridge between North and South America. For the first time in anyone's life, you can look at the hemisphere from Canada to the tip of Argentina and envision a continent that is democratic, middle class, and free. It's within our reach. It can be transformative. But what we have is we have, at a minimum, beyond Venezuela and a few other places, we have this incredible bottleneck. Central America is still mired in corruption. That's why when the president asked me to manage the policy in the hemisphere, I spent time in each of those countries, meeting with each of those leaders, putting together what they asked me to do because I had drafted Plan Colombia back in 2000. Well, before that, it finally passed, which transformed Colombia, which was on the brink of becoming nothing more than a narco state. That's not about me, it's about the Colombians. And they said, will you draft such a law for us? And the president authorized me to do that with the help of the Congress. But the sine qua non for proceeding was dealing with corruption. The same needs to be done in the rest of Central America to open up the enormous possibilities, establishing, I said, an electric grid that will bring light to enormous segments of the community, not unlike what we did in the TVA back in the 30s. And I don't have to tell those of you who are in business the possibilities of pipelines, shipping, business opportunities, expansion of ports and airports, and the opportunities are available to you. And it can only be done with more transparency, openness, and giving people the opportunity to participate. The second issue that sort of overrides all that you're talking about and will talk about is the issue of sustainable development and extreme poverty. A few weeks ago, I met in my office with President Yayi of Benin, a small West African country about the size of Ohio. Together, we signed a compact to help modernize their power sector, which can again transform that country. With our help, banks will lend money, companies will lay wires, entrepreneurs will open business, and people will rise out of poverty because they can turn on the lights, figuratively and literally. The initial $7 billion commitment from the U.S. government has mobilized more than $20 billion off the sidelines from the private sector and will bring electricity to more than 60 million African homes. Government is not the answer. The free enterprise system is the answer. But what we found is, if we engage and set goals, in the Recovery Act, we spend over $800 billion. I might add, as every outside group has shown, with less than 0.25% waste or fraud. The reason I mention this to you is that we have an opportunity, a transformative opportunity, to bring power and empower people to do things they never could do before. Grow businesses, teach classes at night, connect with distant families. Many don't understand that giving people hope is sometimes more consequential than giving them help. But we have to do more of it around the world. The last issue that needs to be faced is the issue of a generation, and it overrides every other problem we face. We can literally, not figuratively, be overwhelmed in all of our efforts if we don't deal with it. And it's climate change. Not only is it an issue of life and death long term, it's a national security issue. Most people talk about climate change in terms of the science of it. Now, a lot of our friends on the other team, they don't think there's global warming. They also deny gravity and a few other things. It's just kind of fascinating. But what gets the attention of my conservative friends when I talk about climate change, and it surprises them, is that the Department of Defense several years ago put together a very thick compendium on global warming, saying that global warming is a threat multiplier. They talk in no-nonsense terms about our security and our stability. They point out that as time goes on and the physical changes continue to occur, conflicts will occur. As the military points out, if sea levels rise 1.5 feet more and you have millions of people in South Asia literally unable to live in their homes with mass migration, that's the stuff which destabilizes governments. That's the stuff of war. So the point I'm trying to make is these are deadly serious issues that if we don't attend to them, and it's not the scope of what you're doing now, all the other things you're doing will be swamped. Swamped by corruption, lack of sustainability for lack of energy and opportunity, and climate change. Governments can do a lot, but we cannot do it without your intellectual, political, and moral support. So folks, we got a lot to do. We got a lot to do, but we have enormous possibilities with you all in the game. And one of my favorite contemporary poets is Seamus Heaney. And he wrote a poem called The Cure at Troy. And there's a line, a stanza in that poem that better describes where we are right now, in my view, if we seize the opportunity. And I'll get out of your hair. The poem has a stanza that says, "History teaches us not to hope on this side of the grave. But then, once in a lifetime, that tidal wave of justice rises up, and hope and history rhyme." Thank you very much.